Yo, 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 what it do, what it be? It's your boy, Agent A and T, repping the Spell Block Agency, coming to y'all with another Apex Legendary commentary. Today we gonna be talking about another history, mystery, and conspiracy. And this one takes place in the 1960s. Actually, we got a double feature today. Today we gonna be talking about what happened to Jimmy Hoffa and did Lee Harvey Oswald act alone in killing John F. Kennedy? Those two questions have captivated Americans for decades. And today, I'm going to be looking at some of this new information that's come from Michael Franzis and some of these declassified documents from the CIA. But mostly from Michael Franzis' interviews that he's had in the past couple years. And I'm going to definitely use those and some of the info that was presented beforehand to kind of look into some of the claims that he's made and see if we could kind of gain some new perspective into both of the cases. And I'll also be giving my theory on both of these cases. So let's start with Jimmy Hoffa. And if you don't know who Jimmy Hoffa is or was, he was actually one of the most powerful men in New York for a little while, and he was a union boss for the biggest union in New York at the time, called the Teamsters. And the Teamsters union for decades was known for having deep mob ties and was pretty much used as a front to commit white collar crimes such as embezzlement, create labor strikes, or even taking solicit bribes to politicians. Now, that's not to say that it didn't actually improve labor conditions for the union that they were under. Like, it was basically a union for truckers and all that in New York. So, yeah, it definitely improved labor conditions in the long run. But a lot of the crime that was being committed kind of made people overlook the good that it did, of course. So Jimmy Hoffa eventually became the president of the Teamsters, and during the 60s, as the Kennedy family was getting more involved in politics, they saw indicting Hoffa as a way to legitimize their spot in politics and garner more votes and take down a legitimate crook who was the boss of one of the biggest unions in America. You know, kind of like a triple win, if you will. But in 1963, Robert and John Kennedy were successful. They indicted Hoffa on a bribery charge in Nashville, and they locked him up. In 1971, however, after unsuccessful attempts at appealing the case, Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence for time served on the condition that he not serve in any unions until 1980. Hoffa heavily disputed that ruling. I mean, he was cool with having his sentence commuted, but he argued that him not being able to join any unions or serve on any union boards was actually an infringement on his constitutional rights in his pursuit for life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and all that. So instead of taking the ban in grace and just wait until 1980, he was trying everything he could to seize back power in his presidency of the Teamsters. However, he would vanish before that could happen, and his name would become synonymous with disappearing and kidnapping, among rumors and innuendo that the mob had something to do with his disappearance. Now, for a long time, Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance was a mystery. People thought he was buried under Giant Stadium, among other places. I mean, they actually dug up some of these places, but his body has never been found. Michael Franzis, who was a powerful mob capo in the 1970s and 80s, was an active mobster during this era, and he alleges three things. Number one, the man who killed Hoffa is still alive, and he's allegedly in prison. Number two, Hoffa's body is somewhere wet. That's all the hint that he's given us for now. And number three, he also claims he has a taped confession from the person from a person who was there that detailed the Hoffa hit. I'm pretty sure it's the same guy who he alleges is the guy in prison and is still alive. So until that tape comes out, or Franzis decides to spill the beans on Hoffa's remain location or all that, Jimmy Hoffa's remains will seemingly never be found, from what I can gather, and he's pretty confident about that. So it's likely, though, that Hoffa was murdered by the mafia, as around 30 years earlier, say, a similar situation happened with Albert Anastasia, who was pretty much the head of Murder Inc. I talked about him in the other video. I'll leave a link to that in the description if y'all want to know more. But this is my theory. Hoffa, like Anastasia, was addicted to power. Of course, absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you give somebody power over, something like the Teamsters or even a crew of hitmen that go cross-country murdering people, when you take that power away from the leader of that group, that leader's not, he's not going to be so quick to just, give up his power like that. It doesn't happen 9 times out of 10 like that. There's a lot of people that won't relinquish power if they have it, which is completely understandable. I mean, who doesn't want to not have power? I mean, you live in a comfortable life, you feel like you're untouchable. Why would you ever want to give that up? So, pretty much, it was pretty much, thought that Hoffa was pretty much murdered by the mob, and like I said, him and Anastasia, I mean, granted they weren't like doing the same thing, but their murders took place 30 years apart, but pretty much had the same message. Nobody is untouchable. It don't matter if you're the boss of the Teamsters or if you're the head of, Murder Inc. You get in the mob's way, you will get taken out of the way. Plain and simple. And if you don't believe me, just look at JFK. I mean, by any means, he was the most powerful man in the United States, if not in the entire world, as the leader of the United States of America at the time. And I mean, in my opinion, he was probably the last decent presidential candidate, but I digress from that point. But JFK had made some powerful enemies on his way to the top. And I'm not talking about communists, I'm talking about the mafia. And even today, there are a lot of people that think JFK either wasn't killed by Lee Harvey Oswald solo, or they think Oswald didn't act alone, or they think, it wasn't Oswald at all. Like, Oswald was pretty much just a fall guy. Now, I can kind of recall a History Channel documentary that they had a trained sniper try to emulate Oswald's 3 shots he took, because according to the Warren Commission, Oswald was the sole shooter, and he took 3 shots in 6 seconds. And a lot of speculation was that these shots would have been, impossible to hit, or, they had the magic bullet theory, which has since been debunked. But yeah, Oswald definitely could have gotten those shots off. He was a trained Marine. Any Marine will tell you that they could definitely take those shots. Even untrained marksmen could get those shots off, especially with the training that he had. So wasn't really hard for him to do that. It's everything to me that goes down after Oswald kills JFK. Now, the only film that we have on this incident, I mean, we have pictures and stuff, but the only film evidence that we have is the Zapruder Film. And I mean, that was one of the main, that film, I mean, watching it when I was younger was one of the main reasons why I always thought there was 2 shooters. I mean, if at first glance you see JFK's head kind of tilt backwards, like he's being shot from the front, and then you see like the bullet kind of exit his face, which it's going so fast it makes it look like it was going forward, like he got hit in his face going forward. But if you look closely, no, the bullet actually exits JFK's face as it goes in through the back of his head. That's what the autopsy said. Unfortunately, you see it all on camera, and you see his wife try and gather his brain matter from the trunk of the car. It's really one of the most tragic films in history. I mean, I want to say there's a picture of Franz Ferdinand, the dude whose assassination kind of started World War II. I want to say there's a picture of him getting assassinated, but it might just be like an artist's recreation. But if there is, it's the closest thing we kind of have in comparison to the Zapruder film of a big, politician getting killed on film. The leader of a country. So it was a crazy time, and of course, all the movies that have been made about it, like I just mentioned, the magic bullet theory in the JFK movie. You had the rumor and innuendo that, of course, that Oswald didn't act alone, and there was a shooter from the grassy knoll. But one thing that I noticed after rewatching the Zapruder film is, and I can't remember where I read it, but it's something that it made me notice that somebody said, if you look at the Zapruder film, there's nobody running away from the grassy knoll. If someone was shooting in the grassy knoll, which is, right where the Zapruder film is taking place, you don't see anybody running from there. I mean, you see Kennedy come down from like the highway sign or whatever, and you see him clutching his throat, because the first shot's already been fired. Then you see the second shot fired, but you don't see anybody like panicking or running because they don't hear any shots fired near them, near the grassy knoll. Now, some people said that there were, or they did hear shots fired. There's not really any evidence of that. There was no shell casings picked up on the grassy knoll. There was nothing that would ever point to there being a shooter, especially on film, because nobody is running away. You see people like reacting to, oh my God, the president's getting shot, we need to kind of run, but nobody really knows where the shots are coming from. And even then, you see the CIA or the Secret Service agent trying to like run on the back of the car as right before the fatal shot of JFK gets taken. But yeah, I mean, it was a hectic scene. Crazy that the Zapruder film is the only evidence we have, but we also I would kind of mention the Warren Commission, I think, but I'll get to that in a minute. But the U.S. government actually, within the past few years, had declassified some documents relating to the JFK assassination, and President Trump actually ordered some of those documents to former President Trump, I should say, ordered those documents to remain classified until October 26th of this year. Now, I haven't seen any of the declassified documents that they released on the 16th or on the 26th, I'm sorry. But I'm going to have to do some digging on that, see if anybody from Reddit or, do some Googles and research that, see what new information has been found. But Michael Franzis has filled in some of the blanks because, I mean, like I said, Oswald could absolutely hit those 6 shots or those 3 shots in 6 seconds. But his actions and other details of what happened after that day, plus Oswald's murder and Jack Ruby dying before he could get protection and tell the feds why he really shot Oswald, those details will be the eternal fuel to my conspiracy instincts. But again, like I said, Michael Franzis kind of filled in some of those blanks recently on some of the questions I had surrounding JFK. And like I said, the government is released those documents. And one detail that's actually interesting that has been released is that Jack Ruby was actually in Dealey Plaza during the JFK assassination. And that is a direct contradiction of the Warren Commission. No cap, no gown. He apparently is quoted as telling somebody in Dealey Plaza, a witness from that day or whatever, that made a statement to the CIA. Jack Ruby is quoted as saying, "Are you sticking around for the fireworks or nah?" Pretty much. Because as if he knew there was something that was going to go down in Dealey Plaza that day. Now, I'm really interested in what the documents they just released have to say, because Michael Franzis actually alluded to the fact that Jack Ruby had mob ties. Plus JFK's dad had mob ties. And the mob maybe was tied to some of the JFK's early political successes before they started cracking down, the Kennedy brothers started to crack down on organized crime. And JFK made it a point in his later career that he was no friend of the mob. And despite the mob's involvement, with the Bay of Pigs and their work with the CIA, and they blackmailed J. Edgar Hoover, but Kennedy made it clear that he wasn't some mob puppet, and he actually made enemies with the mob due to him and his brother cracking down on organized crime. That, plus the fact that the mobsters lost a lot of money when Fidel took over Cuba, and that forced the mob to continue to invest their money and launder their money in Vegas, which, didn't make JFK any friends either, because, of course, if the mob was able to launder their money and shift their focus over to Cuba, then the IRS and the American government really wouldn't have the jurisdiction, I guess, to watch what these guys are doing and know how these guys are spending their money if they're spending it in a whole nother country. So it's a lot harder to prosecute them if they're hiding their money overseas, or they're not even there in America at all anymore. Completely. And at the time, it's kind of crazy because the mob wasn't even on the government's quote unquote radar, at least not in it was on JFK's radar, sure. But JFK was a president. He had bigger fish to fry than the mob. FBI wasn't trying to prosecute them because the mob had dirt on him. Back then in at least the 60s, they weren't really worried about the mafia. There was some concern, of course, but the bigger fish to the government, at least, was the Black Panther Party. And and MLK and Malcolm X. The FBI was more worried about digging up dirt on those guys, instead of going after the organization that controlled half the country at some point, if not more. So it was definitely a crazy time, but like I said, JFK made enemies, and how Oswald kind of fits into this and Jack Ruby's involvement is all a mystery, because these are the biggest question marks to me. I don't understand how does Oswald get that close to Kennedy? To me, Oswald didn't have the ties to be in the right place at the right time with Kennedy and have the gun and all that. And also we'll take a look in a future video on MLK's assassination, because even then the guy who assassinated MLK didn't seem like a guy who would have the knowledge or the wherewithal to plan something like that, to assassinate MLK. And even the dude who assassinated MLK claimed that there was another party involved instructing him kind of where MLK would be. But story for another day. But again, just weird how Oswald kills Kennedy, and he's not placed in any sort of like protection. They wheel this guy out in the middle, they take this guy out of the Dallas police department after he kills an officer supposedly, and JFK. And he's the most hated man in America, and they just wheel him out of the police department willy-nilly so Jack Ruby can just walk up on him and smoke him. And Jack Ruby's whole thing was, oh, he killed my president. I was a big fan of Kennedy. He didn't deserve. That's all BS to me. Because to me, even it's been reported, and there are several reports on this, that Jack Ruby wanted protection from the feds so that he could really tell the real story of why he killed Oswald. And he never got that. And of course, the feds pretty much told him, dude, our president just got assassinated. What makes you think we can protect you? You could tell us what really happened, but, we can't guarantee that this isn't going to get back to the wrong people. So, Ruby dies a few years later, and whatever secrets he had about the JFK assassination is gone. Unless, these documents point to something different. But that's the main key to me, that, the Warren Commission straight up said, hey, Jack Ruby was not there. He was not even in the area at the time of, this event. And he was. He was absolutely in Dealey Plaza. So, contradicting reports and conflicting reports, that raises big questions, and how Oswald was able to get his hands on the rifle and just kind of go undetected during that time before the assassination. It's just weird. No one knew that he, no one noticed anything weird or anything like that. And it just, there's a lot of details. Like, especially with Oswald, or not Oswald, but Jack Ruby's mob ties. And, maybe we'll never know. But it just seems to me that, sure, Oswald may have been the sole shooter. But was his motives really that he was like this communist guy, and, he was a communist sympathizer? And sure, his records say he was. They say he defected to Russia or whatever. And so, he had the motive. But that doesn't necessarily mean he had, like, any of the weaponry or the artillery or anything to really carry out anything, unless somebody supplied him with that stuff. And apparently he bought some rifle that could be traced, and instead of going to like a local shop where it couldn't be traced or something like that. I don't know. It was just weird. But I don't know. Maybe we'll never know. But with details coming to light, it seems like we'll be more closer to the truth. And, but it seems to me, my theory is that Ruby killed Oswald to keep Oswald quiet. Because, in my opinion, Oswald wasn't going to take the fall. He probably was going to be like, okay, well, I'm not the only guy who planned this out. You guys think I acted alone? No. So Ruby was like, I can't have this. And the Mafia. Mafia told Ruby, hey, you got gambling debts? You want to pay your debts off? Tie up these loose ends to the JFK assassination. But it's just my opinion. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. Stay tuned, because I got more hot content dropping soon. Be safe out there, y'all. Don't get smoked. I'm out. Peace.